Luna walked through the metal corridors of the starship Moon Whisper, with her long silver hair tied back in a braid that reached her waist and her pointed ears hidden under a special headband that made her look human to anyone who might glance her way as she passed by the busy crew members rushing to their stations. She had been living this lie for 3 years now, and pretending to be just another human navigator was exhausting but necessary because humans were not ready to know that. Elves existed among them and definitely not ready to know about the dragons that lived in her quarters. The morning shift was starting, and she nodded to Lieutenant Casey, who smiled back, without suspecting that the woman he saw every day was actually thousands of years old and came from a world where magic flowed like water through every living thing. Her quarters were on Deck 7, and she pressed her palm against the scanner, which recognized not just her human disguise, but also the deeper genetic markers that confirmed her true identity, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside her room, Spark and Ember immediately flew to greet her with tiny roars of joy, and their scales shifted from deep blue to bright gold, showing their happiness at seeing her return from her night shift on the bridge. The 2 dragons were no bigger than Earth cats, but their intelligence surpassed most creatures in the galaxy, and they had been her companions since she was young by elf standards, which meant only 500 years ago. She removed her uniform jacket and hung it carefully in the closet, while Spark landed on her shoulder and nuzzled against her cheek with his warm snout that smelled like cinnamon and starlight. Ember preferred to float near the ceiling, where she had built a small nest from strips of metal and fabric that Luna provided, and from there she watched everything with eyes that held ancient wisdom despite her small size. The room was her sanctuary, and the only place on the ship where she could be herself, without the constant pressure of maintaining her human appearance, which required concentration and magical energy that drained her more each day. She sat on her meditation mat and closed her eyes while the dragons began their evening song, which was actually morning for her since she worked the night shift. But time had different meaning in space anyway. The melody they created together was older than human civilization, and it helped her restore the magical energy she spent maintaining her disguise and operating the navigation systems with precision. No human could match. A sudden knock at her door made her eyes snap open, and the dragons immediately went silent and invisible, using their natural camouflage ability that made them appear to be nothing more than shadows on the wall. She stood up and smoothed her uniform before opening the door to find Commander Hayes standing there with a datapad in his hand and a concerned expression on his weathered face. He told her that the ship would be taking on new crew members at the next space station, and 2 of them would be Zalari twins who were part of the new Galactic exchange program meant to promote cooperation between species. Luna had heard of the Zalari with their purple skin and 4 arms and their ability to see in spectrums that humans could not even imagine. But she had never met one in person and wondered if they might see through her disguise. Hayes continued explaining that as one of the senior navigation officers, she would be responsible for showing them around the ship and helping them adjust to working with humans, which meant spending significant time with beings who might discover her secret. She accepted the assignment with a smile that hid her concern, and after Hayes left, she turned to look at Spark and Ember, who had materialized again and were watching her with tilted heads. The dragons could sense her worry, and Ember flew down from her nest to land on Luna's other shoulder, while both creatures hummed a soothing frequency that helped calm her racing thoughts. 3 days later, the ship docked at Station Omega 7, and Luna stood with the welcoming committee as the new crew members came aboard, including the Zalari twins, who were even more unusual looking than she had imagined. Crix and Vrex were identical in every way, from their deep purple skin to the patterns of darker spots across their faces, and their 4 arms moved independently in a way that seemed almost hypnotic to watch. Their eyes were completely black without any visible iris or pupil, and they were larger than human eyes, taking up more of their face and giving them an expression of constant surprise or curiosity. Captain Rodriguez introduced everyone, and when Luna shook hands with each twin using the traditional human greeting, she felt something strange, like a tingling sensation where their skin touched hers. The twins looked at each other with an expression she could not read, then looked back at her with those unblinking black eyes that seemed to see more than just her physical form. She gave them the standard tour of the ship, showing them the bridge and engineering and the mess hall and medical bay, while they asked questions in their strange double voice that sounded like two people speaking in perfect harmony. They were scientists specializing in xenobiology, and their mission was to study how different species worked together in confined spaces like starships, which meant they would be observing everyone closely. Luna tried to stay calm and professional, but she could feel their eyes on her constantly, and several times she caught them whispering to each other in their own language, which sounded like musical notes played backwards. When she showed them to their quarters, which were right down the hall from hers, she noticed them looking at her door with particular interest, though she had no idea why it would stand out from all the others. That night she performed her usual meditation ritual but kept feeling like she was being watched, even though she had checked her privacy settings 3 times and made sure her door was locked. The dragons were restless too, and Spark kept flying to the door and back while Ember made small growling sounds that usually meant she sensed something unusual in the area. Luna tried to focus on restoring her energy, but the presence of the Zalari twins on the ship had disrupted something in the careful balance she had maintained for 3 years. She did not know that at that very moment the twins were in their quarters, discussing the strange energy readings they had detected from her room using their special perception that let them see the flow of forces humans did not even know existed. The next few days passed with growing tension as Luna tried to maintain her normal routine, while constantly feeling the presence of the Zalari twins who seemed to appear wherever she went on the ship. She would be eating breakfast in the mess hall, and they would sit at a nearby table watching her with those black eyes while pretending to study their data pads. But she knew they were observing her specifically. During her shifts on the bridge, they would stand near her station, claiming they needed to understand navigation procedures, but their attention was focused on her hands as she worked the controls with precision that surprised even veteran officers. Captain Rodriguez praised her work as always, but Luna noticed the twins exchanging meaningful looks every time she calculated a course correction faster than the computer, or predicted spatial anomalies before the sensors detected them. One evening she was preparing for her meditation ritual, and had just started removing her uniform, when the ship suddenly lurched hard to one side, throwing her against the wall, while alarms began blaring throughout the corridors. Spark and Ember immediately flew to her side with their scales turning bright red, showing their alarm, and she quickly pulled her uniform back on, though not completely fastened, as she needed to check what was happening. She activated her console and saw that the ship had encountered an unexpected asteroid field that was not on any charts, and the rocks were moving in patterns that defied normal physics, as if something was controlling them. The ship shook again, and this time her lights flickered, and she heard the terrible sound of her door lock disengaging as the emergency protocols activated to ensure no crew member was trapped during a crisis. Before she could react, her door slid open, and there stood Crix and Vrex with their forearms spread for balance, and their black eyes going impossibly wider as they saw her standing there with her uniform hanging open. But what made them freeze completely was not her state of undress, but the 2 small dragons flying around her head with their scales glowing like living jewels and leaving trails of sparkles in the air. She stood frozen too, with her hands halfway to closing her uniform, while the twins stared at her, and the dragons who were now hovering protectively between her and the unexpected visitors. Vrex made a sound that might have been a gasp in their language, and pointed with 2 of his arms at the dragons, while his other 2 hands covered what might have been his mouth, though their anatomy was different from humans. Crix took a step forward and then stopped when Ember hissed at him with a small puff of flame that made the air shimmer with heat, and Luna finally found her voice telling them they needed to leave now. But the ship shook again even harder, and the lights went out completely, leaving them in darkness, except for the natural glow of the dragons, whose scales provided enough light to see by. The twins did not move, and she realized they were either in shock or amazed, or possibly both, while she quickly fastened her uniform and tried to think of how to explain what they were seeing. Then Crix spoke, in that double voice, saying they had suspected she was not human from the energy patterns they detected, but they never imagined she was one of the legendary star elves they had only heard about in ancient stories. Vrex added that the dragons were supposed to be extinct or mythical, but here they were real and alive and bonded to her in a way their instruments could actually measure as quantum entanglement. Luna felt her secret of 3 years crumbling, but there was no time to worry about it, as another impact rocked the ship. and she heard Captain Rodriguez over the comm system calling all senior officers to the bridge. She pushed past the twins who followed her without hesitation, while Spark and Ember flew alongside her, no longer bothering to hide since they had already been seen. On the bridge, chaos reigned as officers tried to navigate through the asteroid field that seemed to be getting denser and moving in ways that violated the laws of physics they understood. Captain Rodriguez looked up as Luna entered and started to say something, but stopped when she saw the two small dragons and the Zalari twins right behind her, with expressions of awe on their purple faces. Luna went straight to her station and placed her hands on the console, and for the first time since joining the crew, she did not hold back her abilities as she let her magic flow through the navigation systems. The screens around her lit up with patterns that were not part of any human programming, as she reached out with senses that had nothing to do with technology and felt the true nature of the asteroid field. It was not natural, but rather a trap created by an alien race that used gravity manipulation to capture ships, and she could feel the tendrils of their control wrapping around the Moon Whisper like invisible chains. She looked at Captain Rodriguez and told her they were caught in a hunter's web, and the only way out was to break the pattern, which meant doing something the hunters would not expect. The captain asked what she meant, and Luna took a deep breath before explaining that she was not human, but an elf, and the dragons were her bonded companions, and together they could disrupt the gravity field. Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment while the bridge crew watched in stunned silence, and then the captain said she did not care if Luna was a purple elephant, as long as she could save the ship. Luna smiled and called to Spark and Ember, who grew larger right there on the bridge, expanding from cat size to the size of horses, while the crew scrambled back to give them room. The twins stepped forward and offered to help, saying their technology could amplify whatever Luna planned to do, and she accepted, knowing she would need all the power she could get. She began to sing in the ancient language of her people, while the dragons joined their voices to hers, creating a harmony that made the air itself vibrate with power that human instruments could not measure. The twins activated devices on their forearms that created a purple energy field around Luna, and the dragons and somehow their alien technology merged with her magic, creating something entirely new. Outside the ship, the asteroids began to slow their impossible movements as the controlling force found itself fighting against a power it did not understand or expect from what should have been helpless prey. Luna felt the hunters pushing back and trying to tighten their trap, but she pushed harder, while Spark breathed a stream of silver fire that somehow traveled through the ship's shields and into space itself. Ember added her golden flames to her brothers, and the two streams of dragon fire spiraled around each other, creating a double helix of pure energy that burned through the invisible web holding them. The battle between Luna's magic and the alien hunters lasted for what felt like hours, but was actually only minutes as time seemed to stretch and compress around them, while reality itself bent under the strain of opposing forces. She could feel the hunters through the connection they had created, and they were not evil but rather desperate beings from a dying system who had turned to piracy to survive, though that did not make them less dangerous. The bridge crew watched in amazement as the elf woman they had known as a simple navigator stood at the center of a swirling vortex of silver light, while two dragons breathed impossible fire into space. Lieutenant Casey was recording everything on his personal device, while muttering that nobody would ever believe this footage was real and not some elaborate special effects from a movie. Commander Hayes stood near the captain with his mouth open as he watched the tactical display show the asteroids beginning to move away from the ship as if pushed by an invisible hand. The Zalari twins had moved closer to Luna and were adjusting their devices constantly while speaking to each other in rapid musical notes that seemed to synchronize with the song she was singing. Suddenly, Luna felt the hunter's grip break completely, and the asteroids scattered in all directions as the controlling force retreated, and she collapsed to her knees while the dragons shrank back to their small size. Crix caught her with two of his arms, while Vrex scanned her with a medical device and announced that her life signs were stable, but her energy readings were unlike anything in their database. Captain Rodriguez ordered the helm to get them out of the area at maximum speed while she walked over to where Luna was slowly standing up with help from the twins. The captain looked at her for a long moment and then asked how long she had been pretending to be human, and why she had hidden her true nature from everyone on the ship Luna. straightened her uniform and met the captain's eyes as she explained that her people had been living among humans for centuries and helping from the shadows because humans were not ready for the truth. She told them about the elf colonies scattered throughout human space and how they worked as navigators and scientists and doctors and even soldiers while keeping their magic hidden. The dragons landed on her shoulders, and she introduced them properly as Spark and Ember, who were not pets but partners bonded to her soul through ancient rituals that predated human space travel. Rodriguez asked why Luna had chosen to reveal herself now, and she explained that she had no choice because the ship would have been destroyed if she had held back her powers any longer. The entire bridge crew was listening now, and Casey asked if all the fairy tales about elves were true, and Luna smiled, saying some were based on truth, but most were human imagination. She demonstrated by creating a small ball of light in her palm that floated up and split into dozens of tiny lights that danced around the bridge before fading away like dying stars. Hayes wanted to know if there were other mythical creatures living among humans, and Luna hesitated before admitting that the galaxy was far stranger than most humans imagined. The twins interrupted to say that Luna's energy signature was stabilizing, but she needed rest and proper nourishment, which for her kind meant something different than standard ship rations. Rodriguez made a decision that surprised everyone by officially noting in the log that Navigator Luna was a valued crew member whose species was irrelevant to her performance, and anyone who had a problem with that could request a transfer. The bridge crew began to applaud, and Luna felt tears in her eyes as she realized they were accepting her true self, rather than fearing or rejecting what she was. Over the next few days, the entire ship learned about their elf crew member, and the reactions ranged from fascination to disbelief to requests for magical demonstrations. Luna found herself giving impromptu lessons about elf culture in the mess hall, while Spark and Ember became the most popular beings on the ship, with crew members lining up to pet them. The twins became her constant companions, and they explained that their people had long suspected other magical species existed but had never found proof until now. They showed her their research on the energy she produced and how it interacted with their technology in ways that could revolutionize both science and magic. If properly understood, Luna began teaching them the basics of magical theory while they shared their advanced knowledge of quantum mechanics, and the two systems began to merge in unexpected ways. One evening, she was in her quarters with the twins when Vrex asked about the meditation ritual they had interrupted and whether clothing truly blocked magical energy flow. She explained that, for elves, the body was a conduit for cosmic forces, and any barrier between skin and energy reduced the efficiency of spell casting and ritual work. Crix mentioned that Zalari had similar practices for their mental linking ceremonies, and asked if she would be comfortable demonstrating a proper ritual now that her secret was known. Luna considered this and agreed, but warned them that elf rituals could be intense for other species to witness, and they should be prepared for unusual sensory experiences. She dimmed the lights and activated the privacy shield and then began to undress while the twins watched with scientific curiosity rather than any inappropriate interest. When she stood in the circle of crystals from her homeworld, the tattoos that covered her body became visible, and they were not ink but living light that moved across her skin in patterns. The dragons took their positions at cardinal points around her and began their ancient song while she moved through the ritual forms that her grandmother had taught her centuries ago. The twins recorded everything with their instruments and later told her that the energy readings were beyond anything their civilization had encountered in millennia of space exploration. Taught them to see the flow of magic without instruments and to feel the currents that connected all living things in a web of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. They practiced together every evening, and soon the twins could create small magical effects of their own which delighted them and proved that magic was not limited to elves. Word of their experiments reached other crew members, and soon Luna had a small class of humans and aliens learning the basics of what she called practical magic. Captain Rodriguez attended one session and successfully levitated a stylus for 3 seconds before it clattered to the table, and she declared that was enough magic for one lifetime. The ship's doctor wanted to study Luna's physiology, but she politely declined most tests while allowing basic scans that revealed her bones were less dense, but stronger than human bones. Her blood was slightly luminescent under certain lights and contained elements that did not appear on the standard periodic table, which excited the science team to no end. 3 weeks after the revelation of Luna's true identity, the ship received a priority distress signal from a human colony on the edge of settled space that was under attack by unknown raiders. The message was fragmented, but mentioned ships with technology that seemed to phase in and out of reality, making them impossible to target with conventional weapons. Captain Rodriguez called a senior staff meeting, and Luna attended openly with Spark perched on her shoulder, while Ember floated near, the ceiling observing everyone with ancient eyes. The captain explained that the colony had over 50,000 civilians, and the nearest military vessel was 3 days away, which meant the Moon Whisper was their only hope. Hayes pointed out that they were not a warship and had limited weapons, but Rodriguez said they had something better, and looked directly at Luna, who understood immediately. The twins stood up with their 4 arms, gesturing excitedly as they explained how they had been working on combining their technology with Luna's magic to create new defensive capabilities. They had discovered that dragonfire, when channeled through their quantum processors, could create shields that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them nearly impenetrable. Luna added that she had been in contact with other elves in the sector through magical communication, and 3 of them were already heading to help, but would not arrive in time. The journey to the colony took 18 hours at maximum speed, and Luna spent the time preparing with the twins while teaching volunteer crew members basic protective spells. She was surprised how quickly humans adapted to magic, once they accepted it was real, and not just tricks or illusion, but actual manipulation of fundamental forces. Casey proved particularly talented, and managed to create a shield bubble that lasted for 30 seconds, which was impressive for someone who had only known magic existed for 3 weeks, when they dropped. Out of hyperspace near the colony, the scene was worse than expected, with debris from destroyed ships floating everywhere, and the planet's surface showing signs of bombardment. The raiders were still there, and their ships were like nothing in any database, with hulls that seemed to be made of crystallized shadow that bent light around them. Luna could feel wrongness radiating from those ships, and the dragons hissed in recognition of something ancient and hostile that should not exist in this reality. Rodriguez ordered battle stations while Luna went to the bridge and began preparing for what she knew would be the fight of their lives against beings from outside normal space. The raiders noticed them immediately, and 3 ships turned to intercept while broadcasting a message in a language that hurt to hear. Even through the universal translator, they demanded surrender and promised quick deaths, rather than the slow consumption of souls, which made several bridge officers turn pale with fear. Luna stood at her station and told the captain these were void hunters and creatures that fed on life energy and existed between dimensions, which explained their phasing technology. She had encountered them once before centuries ago, and knew they could not be destroyed by conventional weapons, but magic could hurt them because it operated on their level. The twins activated their devices and created a link between Luna and the ship's systems that allowed her to channel magic through the Moon Whisper itself. When the first Void Hunter ship fired its weapon, Luna raised her hands and sung a note that turned the energy beam into harmless light that scattered like a prism spark, and Ember grew to their full size again and took positions on either side of her, while she began weaving protections around the ship that made it glow with silver fire. The raiders responded by sending boarding pods that phased through the shields, but Luna was ready and had placed magical traps at every entrance. When the Void Hunters materialized inside the ship, they found themselves facing crew members armed with enchanted weapons that the twins had created overnight. The battle was chaotic, with security teams fighting alongside Luna's magic students while the dragons flew through the corridors breathing fire that burned the invaders. Luna stayed on the bridge maintaining the shields while directing the defense through a mental link she had established with everyone who had learned even basic magic. She felt when Lieutenant Kim in engineering successfully banished a Void Hunter with a spell she had taught him just hours before, and pride mixed with fear for her students. The twins were in the thick of fighting, using 4 weapons simultaneously, while their technology disrupted the phasing ability of the raiders, making them solid and vulnerable. Captain Rodriguez commanded from the bridge with calm efficiency, while trusting Luna to handle the magical defense, which showed remarkable adaptability for someone raised to believe in only science. Through the view screen, they could see the colony's defensive satellites coming back online as Luna's magic cleared the dimensional interference the raiders had been using. The colonists were fighting back too, and she could sense other magical signatures on the planet, which meant some elves or other magical beings were among the population. The lead raider ship suddenly spoke directly into everyone's mind, saying they had not expected to find an elf this far from the old territories, and offering to leave if Luna came with them. She laughed, and told them she was exactly where she belonged, and that humanity was under elf protection now, which was partly bluff, but the raiders did not know that. The twins added their voices, saying the Zalari Commonwealth also stood with humanity, and their combined technologies would end the Void Hunter threat permanently. What happened next surprised everyone as more ships dropped out of hyperspace, but these were not raiders, but rather a mixed fleet of human elf and Zalari vessels. Luna's call for help had been heard, and the response was overwhelming, as ships she did not even recognize joined the battle against the Void Hunters. The raiders tried to phase away, but Luna and 3 other elves on the newly arrived ships wove a net of magic that trapped them in normal space. The battle turned into a rout as the Void Hunters discovered that humans had allies they never suspected, and that the galaxy was uniting against threats like them. When the last raider ship was destroyed or fled, the colony was safe, and Captain Rodriguez found herself in command of a small fleet as the senior officer present, Luna, collapsed from exhaustion, and the twins carried her to medical, where Dr. Patterson fussed over her unusual readings, while Spark and Ember stood guard. She woke up hours later to find half the crew crowded into medical bay wanting to thank her for saving them and the colony, which was embarrassing but heartwarming. Rodriguez came to see her privately and said that everything had changed now, and humanity knew it was not alone and not defenseless against the dangers of the galaxy. Luna agreed, and said this was just the beginning, and that humans were ready to know the truth about magic and the other species that had been protecting them. The aftermath of the battle brought changes that rippled throughout human space as news spread about the elf navigator, who had saved a colony with magic and dragons. Luna found herself at the center of a diplomatic storm, as Earth's government demanded explanations while the elf colonies debated whether to fully reveal themselves. She sat in her quarters with Crix and Vrex, who had become her closest friends and advisors, as they navigated the political complexities of first contact between magical and technological civilizations. The twins had been officially assigned as liaisons between their people and the emerging alliance of humans, elves, and other species that were coming forward. Spark and Ember had become symbols of hope and were featured on news broadcasts across human space, though they remained unimpressed by fame and preferred napping in sunny spots. 3 months after the battle, Luna stood before the United Earth Assembly with Captain Rodriguez and the twins as she prepared to address humanity officially. She wore her true form without disguise, and her silver hair flowed freely, while her pointed ears were visible, and her tattoos glowed softly with inner light. The assembly hall was packed with representatives from every human colony and also delegates from 12 other species who had decided it was time to reveal themselves. Luna began by apologizing for the deception, but explaining that her people had been protecting humanity since they first reached for the stars, which caused murmurs throughout the hall. She told them about the ancient war between magic and chaos that had nearly destroyed the galaxy before humans evolved, and how the elves had sworn to prevent it happening again. The dragons were not the last of their kind, but rather scouts for a larger population that lived in spaces between stars, and had been waiting for humanity to be ready. She introduced other magical beings who had been living among humans, including a secretary who was actually a shapeshifter and an engineer who was a silicon-based lifeform. The revelation that approximately 1 in 1,000 humans actually had elf or other magical ancestry caused the biggest stir as people realized magic was in their blood. Crix and Vrex presented their research showing how magic and technology were not opposites but different aspects of the same universal forces that governed reality. They demonstrated with Luna's help how a fusion of both could create possibilities neither could achieve alone, like healing devices that worked on spiritual and physical levels simultaneously. The assembly voted to create the Unified Systems Alliance, which would include all known species and share both magical and technological knowledge. Freely, Luna was appointed as special advisor for magical affairs, which made her laugh, because 3 months ago, she was hiding her true nature, and now she had an official title. The twins were made co-directors of the new thaumaturgical research, division where magic and science would be studied together for the first time. Officially, Captain Rodriguez was promoted to admiral and given command of the first mixed fleet that would patrol the borders and protect against threats like the Void. Hunters the Moonwhisper became a training vessel, where humans learned magic and elves learned technology, while other species shared their own unique abilities. Luna taught classes every day, and was amazed at how quickly humans adapted, with some showing remarkable talent for specific types of magic. Casey became her teaching assistant and discovered he had strong elvish ancestry, which explained his natural ability with shields and protective magic. The twins made breakthrough after breakthrough in combining their quantum technology with magical principles, creating devices that seemed impossible by either system alone. They developed translators that could convey emotional and spiritual meaning, not just words, and medical scanners that could detect magical ailments as well as physical ones. 6 months after her revelation, Luna stood on the observation deck looking out at Earth, where the first official embassy of the Elf Kingdoms was being established. Spark and Ember sat on her shoulders while the twins stood beside her with their 8 arms, creating a complex pattern that was part technology and part magic. They were heading to the Dragon homeworld, where Luna would introduce human and Zalari representatives to the ancient beings who had watched over the galaxy for millions of years. Rodriguez joined them on the deck and mentioned that she never imagined, when Luna first joined her crew, that they would end up changing the course of human history. Luna smiled and said she never imagined, when she hid her identity, that she would find such acceptance and friendship among humans who she had underestimated. The twins added that this was just the beginning, and that the universe was vast and full of wonders that none of them could imagine yet. They were interrupted by an alert that another species wanted to make contact, having heard about the alliance and deciding it was safe to reveal themselves. Luna laughed and said they would need a bigger ship soon if every hidden species in the galaxy decided to come forward at once, as they prepared to meet the new arrivals. Luna thought about that night when the twins had accidentally seen her during her ritual, and how embarrassed she had been. Now she performed her meditations openly on the bridge sometimes, and crew members would stop to watch the beautiful display of light and energy. The twins never did look away when they saw her, but now it was with respect and friendship and the understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. She had learned that Zalari had their own form of ritual that required removing their outer skin temporarily, which was far more disturbing than simple nudity. The galaxy was full of different beings with different customs and magic and technology, and they were all learning to work together, despite their differences. Luna received a message through magical communication that made her smile as her grandmother congratulated her on finally being herself openly. After centuries of hiding, the old elf added that she was proud Luna had found such good friends in the twins, and that dragons choosing to reveal themselves was a sign of great changes coming. As the ship changed course toward the new contact, Luna felt hope for the future, where magic and science would work together and no one would have to hide their true nature. The twins began singing in their harmonic voice a song they had learned from the dragons, while Spark and Ember added their own melody to create something entirely new. Captain Rodriguez put her hand on Luna's shoulder and said that whatever came next, they would face it together as a crew and as friends united by truth. Luna agreed and thought that being seen for who she really was had turned out to be the best thing that ever happened, even if the beginning had been awkward. The stars stretched out before them, full of infinite possibilities, and she knew that humanity's real adventure in the galaxy was just beginning, with magic as their guide.